I come to the floor this afternoon to discuss two issues. One dealing with the World Bank and another one dealing with the Department of Defense inability to get clean audits. Today, the World Bank is releasing its country partnership framework with China. This reportedly includes $1 to $1.5 billion of loans to China per year and $800 million to $1 billion in private sector investment. Now, keep in mind that the World Bank was created to help economic development in the world's poorest countries. China is now the world's second largest economy after the United States. Also, the United States is the World Bank's largest contributor. I think many Americans would question why so many American tax dollars are going to support low-interest loans in China. In China, there is a large and growing body of evidence of human rights abuses in Xinjiang, including mass internment camps. Reports indicate that these camps are centers for social control and political indoctrination. Chinese authorities reportedly mistreat or even torture detainees while requiring them to engage in forced labor and to renounce their religion and their culture. And yet, the World Bank has supported a program called Technical and Vocational Education and Training Projects in Xinjiang province. This is wording very close to what the Chinese Communist Party euphemistically calls its internment camps. Plus, one reporter has uncovered documents that these schools purchased barbed wire, tear gas, and body armor using other funds, and of course, funds are fungible. Institutions like the World Bank have a great responsibility to further assess critical human right risk and religious freedom, such as those exhibited in Xinjiang, in any region where it lends money. The World Bank's own social framework standards state that when assessing social risks and impacts, the bank must assess threats to human security and impacts on the health, safety, and well-being of workers and project-affected communities. The bank and other such institutions cannot adequately assess a project's full impact without monitoring and examining reports of widespread human rights abuses in any local area. Now, on November the 16th, we had the New York Times publishing leaked Chinese records indicating a coordinated effort going back years, directed by General Secretary Xi, to detain hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs, Kazakhs, and other Muslims in internment camps, and to unleash the tools of dictatorship on the Xinjiang Muslim population. Now, given these repeated reports about repression in Xinjiang that date back even years, it is hard to see how any project in that region could meet the bank's social framework standards. There needs to be a periodic internal review of risk assessment mechanisms to ensure that they are appropriately calibrated to capture changing risk profiles. So I question whether the bank's oversight processes are adequate given its own assessment saw no issue with these intern camps that go by the professional name of technical and vocational education and training projects. And I'm referring particularly to those in Xinjiang province. In a statement on August 29th, the World Bank stated that it had conducted supervision missions twice a year since the project started, and that these missions included a review of social safeguards and a monitoring and evaluation review. The World Bank found, and I'm going to quote from their document, quote, "No evidence from subsequent reviews that funds were diverted, misused, or used for activities not in line with project objectives or World Bank policies and procedures," end of quote. However, now, just last month, the bank raised the environmental and social risk ratings from moderate, the second lowest level, to substantial, and then to high, the highest level. It is very disappointing that very little happened in upgrading the risk assessments on this project until after the congressional attention, even with an internal whistleblower raising the matter. This, to me, seems like a failed process. When routine audits and a whistleblower complaint do not catch anything despite increasingly concerning reports in the media about mistreatment and abuse. I've written a letter to the bank president, Malpass, asking questions about these systemic concerns. Moreover, I question why a country like China, whose economy has far surpassed the threshold at which it is supposed to graduate from World Bank funding, is now and forever still taking loans. The World Bank was created for a very worthwhile purpose, to help poor countries that cannot, on their own efforts, assess capital markets. Both China and Russia today have well surpassed the World Bank graduation threshold and have access to capital markets. And yet American taxpayers are called on to do more. Yet China continues then to borrow an average of $2 billion a year from the World Bank, making it one of the bank's top borrowers. The second largest economy in the world, one of the bank's top borrowers. Countries like China and Russia that have seen the most economic progress should not seek to maintain access to the bank's preferential lending rates and technical support. Moreover, these are our two major geopolitical foes. I've previously highlighted China's intellectual property theft and foreign influence activities at American universities as just as an example of other things I looked at in the case of China. Russia's illegal occupation of territory in Georgia and Ukraine, and its active measures against democracies, including the United States democracy, make it effectively an outlaw state. Meanwhile, China does substantial foreign lending of its own, which it uses as a tool of geopolitical influence over other countries. Now just think, through the World Bank, they get U.S. taxpayers' dollars, and then the country's still so rich that they can lend to many other nations around the world to increase the geopolitical influence of China. And that country's lending does not follow international development finance standards, nor does China disclose the amounts or terms for loans that it offers. Now, through the Belt and Road Initiative of China, which initiative is this process that they invest in other countries to have Chinese influence in these other countries. This Belt and Road Initiative, China, has raised concerns about debt sustainability in recent countries. But they can invest money in these countries, and then they have an agreement that if the loan isn't paid, then China takes over, enhancing their influence. A lot of it for military purposes. A March 2018 report from the Center for Global Development assessed the current debt vulnerabilities of these countries I just referred to, identified as potential Belt and Road Initiative borrowers. So, out of 23 countries determined to be vulnerable to this debt distress, the center identified 8 countries, quote, where the Belt Road Initiative appears to create the potential for debt sustainability problems and where China is a dominant creditor in the key position to address these problems, end of quote. The World Bank, again using American tax dollars, should not be lending to wealthy countries that violate human rights of their citizens and attempt to dominate weaker countries through their loans, whether it's done for military reasons or for economic reasons. The State Foreign Operations Appropriation Bill contains funding and authorization for a large capital increase for the World Bank. In other words, what I just said, the Senate's going to be facing this issue. I have developed an amendment to this bill that would insert language requiring the United States representative to the World Bank to work to defeat any project in a country that has reached the World Bank's own graduation threshold, and secondly, that is designed by the State Department as a country of particular concern for religious freedom or is on the watch list for such designation. And both of those would include China and Russia at this point, countries with broadly documented violations of intentional international norms, human rights, and religious freedoms, then should not be given the privilege of assessing preferential loans that then limit access to other countries that have need. In other words, the second largest economy in the world, China, by getting loans from the World Bank, at the same time they violate the human rights of their people, are denying developing countries that need the loans a lot of resources that they're not getting because they're going to the wealthy nations.